I should have known better than to follow Earl into that cave. He was the kind of man who didn't talk much, which I respected, but there was something in his eyes that day, something I didn't recognize until it was too late. We met him at a gas station just outside Hazard, Kentucky, early on a Saturday morning in October. There were 6 of us: me, my college roommate, Derek, 2 guys from a spelunking forum we'd been chatting with for months, and a couple from Ohio who seemed way too excited about the whole thing. Earl was our guide, recommended by someone who knew someone. He'd been caving in eastern Kentucky for 40 years, knew systems that weren't on any map, places the state didn't even know existed. The drive out to the cave took about an hour, winding through back roads that got narrower and rougher the farther we went. The trees pressed in close on both sides, their branches forming a tunnel overhead that blocked out most of the morning light. Earl didn't say a word the entire drive. He just stared ahead, both hands on the wheel, his jaw working like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. We parked at the end of a logging road that hadn't been used in years. The entrance to the cave was hidden behind a thicket of mountain laurel, a dark mouth in the hillside that exhaled cold, damp air. Earl handed out helmets and headlamps, checked everyone's gear twice, and then finally spoke. "Stay close," he said. "Don't wander off. Don't touch anything you don't have to. And if I tell you to stop, you stop." We nodded. We thought we understood. The first hour inside was exactly what we'd expected. Narrow passages that opened into larger chambers, limestone formations that looked like frozen waterfalls, the constant drip of water echoing in the darkness. Earl moved with the confidence of someone who'd walked these tunnels 1,000 times, pointing out formations, warning us about loose rocks and low ceilings. Derek kept making jokes, trying to lighten the mood, but his voice sounded too loud in the enclosed space, like it didn't belong there. About 2 hours in, we reached a section where the cave split into 3 different passages. Earl studied them for a long time, his headlamp sweeping back and forth across the openings. He finally chose the middle one, but I noticed his hand was shaking when he pointed. We followed him into a tunnel that sloped downward at a steep angle, the walls pressing in so close we had to turn sideways in some places. The air got colder the deeper we went, and there was a smell I couldn't quite place, something ancient and mineral, like wet stone and iron. We'd been in that descending tunnel for maybe 20 minutes when Earl stopped. He didn't say anything, just held up his hand and pressed his palm flat against the limestone wall. We all froze behind him, our headlamps creating a tangle of shadows on the rock. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was water moving through the stone, or maybe air currents shifting in some deeper chamber. But the longer I listened, the more I realized it had a rhythm, a slow, steady pattern, in and out, like something massive was breathing on the other side of the wall. Earl's face had gone completely white. His lips were pressed into a thin line, and I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. "You hear that?" he whispered. We all nodded. "I've heard it before," he said, still not taking his hand off the wall. "Years ago, a different section of this cave, maybe 2 miles north of here, I was with a group, just like this. We heard it, and I told everyone we were leaving. Got out as fast as we could. I never went back to that part of the system." The woman from Ohio, her name was Sarah, laughed nervously. "It's probably just air pressure or something, right? Caves do that." Earl didn't answer. He just stood there with his hand on the wall, listening. The breathing sound continued, slow and rhythmic, and I swear I could feel it through the rock, a faint vibration, like a heartbeat. "We should go back," I said. Derek shook his head. "We came all this way. It's just a weird acoustic thing. Has to be." Earl finally pulled his hand away from the wall. He looked at each of us, his eyes lingering on me for just a moment, and I saw something there I didn't like. Fear, maybe, or regret. "We keep going," he said, "but we move fast, and we don't stop unless I say so. We should have turned back. I knew it then, and I know it now, but we didn't." We followed Earl deeper into the cave, down passages that twisted and turned in ways that made my sense of direction completely useless. And the breathing followed us. It was subtle at first, just a whisper in the background, easy to ignore. But the farther we descended, the louder it became. It wasn't coming from behind us or ahead of us, it was coming from everywhere. From the walls, from the ceiling, from the ground beneath our feet. The entire cave seemed to be inhaling and exhaling around us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were inside something alive. The temperature started to change too. The cold, damp air we'd been breathing since we entered the cave began to feel warmer. Not uncomfortably warm, but noticeable, like we were moving closer to something that gave off heat. Sarah mentioned it first, pulling off her jacket and tying it around her waist. Then the rest of us started to feel it too, a gradual warming that didn't make any sense this deep underground. Earl kept moving, faster now, his headlamp jerking back and forth as he navigated the tunnels. I tried to keep track of the turns we were making, the way the passages branched and reconnected, but I lost count after a while. Everything started to look the same gray limestone, the same mineral deposits, the same darkness pressing in from all sides. We reached a chamber that was larger than the others, maybe 30 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into blackness above our headlamps. Earl stopped in the center and did a slow circle, his light sweeping across the walls. The breathing was louder here, so loud it almost sounded like wind, and the warmth was unmistakable now. I could feel sweat starting to bead on my forehead. "We need to go back," I said again, louder this time. Earl nodded slowly. Yeah, you're right." We turned back the way we'd come, moving faster now, almost jogging through the narrow passages. The breathing kept pace with us, never getting quieter, never falling behind. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something following us, but there was only darkness beyond the reach of our lights. It took us maybe 40 minutes to retrace our steps back to the main chamber where the cave had split into 3 passages. Earl paused there, counting us with his headlamp, touching each of our shoulders as he went. I saw his lips moving, silent numbers. Then he stopped. His hand was still on my shoulder, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring past me, into the darkness behind us. "How many of us came down here?" he asked quietly. 6, Derek said. "You, me, him," he pointed at me. "Sarah, Mike, and Tom. The 2 guys from the forum." Earl shook his head slowly. His hand tightened on my shoulder. "Count again." We all turned, our headlamps illuminating each other's faces. Me, Derek, Sarah, Mike, Tom, Earl, and then, standing just at the edge of the light, someone else. It looked like a person, same height, same general shape, wearing the same kind of caving gear we all had, but there was something wrong about the way it stood. Too still, too perfectly balanced. And its face, I couldn't see its face. Not because it was in shadow, but because there was nothing there to see. Just a smooth, blank surface where a face should have been. None of us moved. None of us breathed. The figure took a step forward, into the light, and I heard Sarah make a small, choked sound. It was mimicking us, wearing our clothes, our gear, standing the way we stood. But it wasn't us. It wasn't anything that should exist. "Run," Earl said. We ran. I don't remember much about the trip back to the entrance. Just fragments: Derek stumbling and catching himself, Sarah crying as she scrambled over rocks, the sound of our breathing echoing in the tunnels, louder even than the breathing that came from the walls. Earl led us through passages I didn't remember, taking shortcuts, pulling us up steep climbs and through tight squeezes. My hands were bleeding by the time I saw daylight ahead, a pale gray circle that looked like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. We burst out of that cave entrance like we'd been shot from a cannon, gasping and tripping over each other in our rush to get into the open air. I fell to my knees in the dirt, my lungs burning, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Earl was the last one out. He stood in the entrance for a long moment, staring back into the darkness, his chest heaving. Then he turned and looked at us, really looked at us, and started counting again. Out loud this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He paused. 7. We counted ourselves. Derek and I stood next to each other. Sarah was sitting on a rock, her face in her hands. Mike and Tom were a few feet away, bent over with their hands on their knees. Earl made 6. 7 people had come out of that cave. We looked at each other, trying to figure out who didn't belong, who was the extra, but we all recognized each other. We all had memories of the drive up, of the morning at the gas station, of descending into the cave. We all belonged. "Check your gear," Earl said, his voice shaking. "Everyone, check your gear. See if anything's missing or different." We did. Everything was exactly as it should be. Same helmets, same headlamps, same packs. Nothing missing, nothing added. Earl pulled out his phone and took a photo of all of us standing together. 6 people in the frame, He took another one. Still 6, but we could all see 7 people standing there. We could count 7 bodies, 7 sets of gear, 7 shadows on the ground. "We need to leave," Earl said. "Right now. Don't look back. Don't talk about what happened. Just get in the vehicles and go." We did. We packed up fast and drove away from that cave without another word. Derek and I didn't speak the entire drive back to campus. Sarah and her boyfriend stopped answering emails after that day. Mike and Tom deleted their accounts on the caving forum. I never saw Earl again. But sometimes, late at night, I still count. I count the people in my apartment, the people I pass on the street, the people sitting in a coffee shop. And sometimes the numbers don't add up the way they should. Sometimes there's one extra. Someone standing just at the edge of my vision, too still, too quiet, wearing my face. I don't go caving anymore, and I don't go back to Kentucky. But I can still hear it when I close my eyes, that slow, rhythmic breathing, coming from somewhere deep underground, somewhere that's waiting for me to come back. My uncle stopped going into caves in the fall of 1987. He never told me why until the night before he died, when the morphine had loosened his tongue enough to let the truth slip out. He was lying in that hospital bed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, and he grabbed my hand with what little strength he had left. "Promise me something," he said. "Promise me you'll never go caving. Not in Tennessee, not anywhere near that border." I promised. And then he told me what happened. In late September of 1987, a geological survey team from Virginia Tech went into a cave system near the Tennessee-Virginia border. There were 5 of them, 3 men and 2 women, all graduate students working on their dissertations. They were supposed to be down there for 3 days, mapping an unexplored section of the cave and collecting mineral samples. They had permits, proper equipment, emergency protocols. Everything was done by the book. On day 4, when they didn't emerge, the university contacted the local authorities. By day 5, they'd assembled a search and rescue team. My uncle was a volunteer with the county search and rescue unit back then, and had been caving since he was a teenager. He knew those mountains better than most people knew their own backyards. When they asked for experienced cavers to join the search, he was one of the first to volunteer. They went in on day 6. There were 12 of them in the search team, split into 3 groups of 4. My uncle's group was assigned to the deepest section of the cave system, the part the survey team had been most interested in exploring. They descended for hours, following markers and maps the survey team had filed with the university, moving through passages that got narrower and steeper the farther down they went. The first thing they found was a camera. It was sitting on a flat rock in a small chamber, positioned carefully, almost deliberately, like someone had set it down and walked away. My uncle picked it up and checked the film counter. It was full. He put it in his pack, and they kept moving. Over the next 6 hours, they found more equipment. A notebook lying open in a puddle of water, its pages soaked and illegible. A climbing harness was tangled in a rock formation. A backpack with someone's initials stitched into it, sitting upright in the middle of a passage, like it had been placed there as a marker. But no people, no bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle or injury. The equipment was scattered across nearly a mile of tunnels, spread out in a way that didn't make sense. It was like the team had deliberately left pieces of their gear behind as they moved deeper into the cave, shedding equipment they didn't need anymore. But that didn't track with what my uncle knew about caving. You didn't abandon your gear underground. You held on to everything, even if it was broken, because you might need it to get back out. They found the main chamber around hour 7. It was massive, bigger than anything on the university's maps, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above their lights. The survey team had set up camp there, sleeping bags laid out in a neat row, a portable stove, food supplies, water bottles. Everything was still there, untouched, like they'd just stepped away for a moment and planned to come right back. And then they found the camcorder. It was sitting on a tripod at the edge of the camp, aimed at the sleeping bags. The record light was off, but the tape inside was full. My uncle's team leader made the decision to take it with them. They packed up as much of the equipment as they could carry and started the long climb back to the surface. When they got out, it was past midnight. They'd been underground for 14 hours. The authorities took the camcorder immediately, said they'd review the footage and see if it gave them any clues about what happened to the team. My uncle went home, slept for 12 hours straight, and woke up to a phone call asking him to come to the sheriff's office. When he got there, they took him into a small room with a TV and a VCR. The sheriff was there, along with 2 state police officers and the search and rescue coordinator. Nobody said a word. They just pressed play. The footage started normally enough. The survey team was setting up camp in that massive chamber, laughing and talking as they unrolled sleeping bags and unpacked equipment. Someone made a joke about bats, and one of the women threw a granola bar at him. They were tired but in good spirits, exactly what you'd expect from a group of grad students doing field work. The timestamp in the corner showed they'd been recording for about 40 minutes when they finally settled down to eat. They sat in a circle, passing around a bag of trail mix, talking about their findings. One of them, a guy with a beard and glasses, was explaining something about limestone formations, gesturing with his hands while he talked. The others were listening, nodding along, eating. Then, at the 2-hour and 6-minute mark, they all stopped. Not gradually. Not one person noticing something and alerts the others. All 5 of them stopped talking, stopped eating, stopped moving at the exact same moment, like someone had pressed a pause button on all of them simultaneously. They were staring at something off camera, something in the darkness beyond the reach of their camp lights. My uncle said you could see it in their faces, that shift from relaxed to alert to afraid that happens so fast you almost miss it. One of the women slowly set down her water bottle. The guy with the beard and glasses took off his headlamp, like the light was making it harder to see what they were looking at. For about 20 seconds, nobody moved. They just sat there, frozen, staring into the darkness. Then they started backing away. It wasn't a panicked scramble. They moved slowly, carefully, like they were afraid of making too much noise or drawing attention to themselves. They got to their feet one by one, their eyes never leaving whatever they were looking at. Their headlamps were shaking, creating wild shadows on the chamber walls. One of them, my uncle, couldn't tell who whispered something. The audio was too distorted to make out the words, but the tone was clear. Terror. Pure, absolute terror. The last 30 seconds of the footage showed them backing toward the edge of the chamber, toward a passage that led deeper into the cave system. They were pressed close together, moving as a group, their lights dancing across the rocks. And then, just before the feed cut out, one of the headlamps swung around and illuminated the area where they'd been staring. My uncle wouldn't tell me what he saw in that brief moment before the screen went black. He said some things were better left unspoken, that describing it would give it a kind of power he didn't want to acknowledge. But he did tell me what happened next. The authorities organized a second search, bigger this time, with more resources, more people. They wanted to find that chamber again, wanted to understand what the survey team had seen. My uncle volunteered again, even though every instinct he had was screaming at him to stay away. They followed the same route he'd taken the first time, using the maps they'd made and the markers they'd left behind. But when they reached the section where the main chamber should have been, they found a collapsed passage. The ceiling had come down, filling the tunnel with thousands of tons of rock and debris. There was no way through. The cave rescue coordinator said it must have happened recently, maybe within the last few days. The rock was still fresh, the dust hadn't settled yet, but my uncle didn't think it was recent. He thought it had happened right after they'd left, right after they'd taken that camcorder out of the cave. They tried other routes, spent 3 days searching for an alternate path to the chamber. They found nothing. Every passage that should have led to that area was blocked or had collapsed, or simply didn't exist anymore. It was like the cave had reorganized itself, sealed off that section completely. The search was called off after a week. The survey team was declared missing, presumed dead. The families held memorial services. The university added its name to a plaque in the geology building. My uncle quit the search and rescue unit the day they called off the search. He packed up all his caving gear, drove it to a donation center, and never set foot in a cave again. He stopped hiking in those mountains too, stopped going anywhere near the Tennessee-Virginia border. I asked him once, years later, why he'd quit. I was maybe 12 or 13, didn't know about the survey team or the footage or any of it. He just looked at me with these tired eyes and said, "Some places don't want to be found, and some things don't want to be seen." The night before he died, when he made me promise never to go caving, he told me one more thing. He said that after they'd watched that footage, after they'd seen what the survey team had seen, the sheriff had asked each of them individually what they thought had happened. They all gave different answers. Equipment failure, carbon dioxide poisoning, mass hallucination, group panic. But my uncle said none of them believed what they were saying. They were just trying to put words to something that didn't have words, trying to rationalize something that couldn't be rationalized. Because the truth, the thing he wouldn't say directly, even on his deathbed, was that the survey team hadn't gotten lost or injured or confused. They'd seen something in that chamber, something that had made them walk deeper into the cave, deeper into the darkness, knowing they'd never come back out. And whatever it was still down there. The camcorder footage was sealed by the state police, classified as part of an ongoing investigation. My uncle said there were copies, though, bootlegs that got passed around among search and rescue crews and serious cavers. He'd heard rumors of people who'd watched it, people who'd become obsessed with finding that chamber again, who'd gone into caves looking for it and never come back. He made me promise one more time before the morphine took him under for good. Promise me you'll stay out of those caves. Promise me you won't go looking. I kept that promise for 20 years. Never went caving, never went near that border, never even thought about it much except on the occasional sleepless night when my mind wandered to dark places. But last month, I was going through my uncle's things, cleaning out his storage unit, and I found a box tucked in the back corner. Inside was a VHS tape with no label, just a piece of masking tape with a date written on it in faded ink. September 1987. I haven't watched it yet. It's sitting on my kitchen table right now, and I keep walking past it, telling myself I should throw it away or burn it or take it to the police. But I know I'm going to watch it. I can feel it pulling at me, the same way I imagine that chamber pulled at the survey team, the same way the darkness pulls at everyone who gets too close to it. My uncle was right about some things. Some places don't want to be found, some things don't want to be seen. But he was wrong about one thing. You can't unsee what you've already seen. You can't unknow what you already know. And I already know I'm going to press play. I know what you're thinking. Going into a cave alone is stupid. It's one of the first rules they teach you. Never cave solo. Always have a partner. Always tell someone where you're going. I knew all that. I'd been caving for 6 years, taken all the safety courses, and read all the manuals. But there's something about being underground alone, in the silence and the dark, that I'd gotten addicted to. It was the only place I could think clearly anymore. The only place where the noise in my head finally stopped. The cave system I'm talking about is in West Virginia, about 40 minutes outside of Lewisburg. It's not on any official maps, no tourist signs pointing the way, nothing like that. You had to know where to look for the entrance, had to know which logging road to take and where to park, so your car wouldn't be visible from the main highway. I'd found it 3 years earlier while hiking, just stumbled across the opening in the side of a limestone ridge. I'd been back a dozen times since then, mapping it slowly, going a little deeper each visit. It was late October when it happened. A Tuesday afternoon, overcast and cold, the kind of day where the sun never really seems to break through. I'd taken the day off work, told my supervisor I had a doctor's appointment. Instead, I drove out to the cave with my gear in the trunk and a thermos of coffee that I drank on the way. The entrance was exactly where I'd left it, hidden behind a wall of mountain laurel that had started losing its leaves. I suited up in the parking area, helmet, headlamp, knee pads, gloves. I had a backup light in my pack, along with water, energy bars, a first aid kit, and my phone in a waterproof case, even though there was no signal this far out. Everything by the book, except for the part where I was going in alone. The first section of the cave was easy, a wide tunnel that sloped gently downward for maybe 200 yards before opening into a larger chamber. I'd named it the cathedral because of the way the ceiling arched overhead, like the inside of a church. My footsteps echoed as I crossed it, the sound bouncing off the walls in a way that always made me feel smaller than I was. Past the cathedral, the cave got more technical, narrower passages, some tight squeezes, a couple of places where you had to chimney up between rock faces or crawl on your belly through gaps that barely fit your shoulders. I'd done it all before, knew every turn and obstacle. I was careful, methodical, taking my time. I'd learned early on that rushing underground was the fastest way to get hurt. I was about a mile in, maybe 45 minutes from the entrance, when I first heard the footsteps. I'd stopped to take a drink of water, standing in a passage that was just wide enough to turn around in. The walls were close on both sides, slick with moisture, and my headlamp created a cone of light that extended maybe 20 feet ahead before being swallowed by darkness. I was screwing the cap back on my water bottle when I heard a soft, scuffing sound, like a boot dragging across stone. I froze, listened. Nothing. I told myself it was just the cave settling, or water dripping somewhere deeper in the system. Caves made all kinds of noises. I'd heard them before, pops and cracks and whispers that were just air moving through cracks in the rock. I finished putting my water bottle away and started walking again. The footsteps started again too. They were behind me, matching my pace exactly. When I took a step, I heard an answering step a second later. When I stopped, they stopped. It was like someone was following me, staying just outside the range of my headlamp, mimicking my movements. I turned around fast, my light sweeping across the passage behind me. Nothing, just an empty tunnel, wet stone, shadows that moved when my lamp moved. "Hello?" My voice sounded small and strange in the enclosed space. No answer. I stood there for a long moment, listening. The footsteps had stopped when I'd stopped. The cave was silent, except for the sound of my own breathing and the distant drip of water somewhere far away. I started walking again, faster this time. The footsteps resumed immediately. Same rhythm, same pace, staying just behind me. I could hear them clearly now, not echoes, not tricks of the cave. Actual footsteps, deliberate and measured. I stopped again. They stopped. I took 3 quick steps. I heard 3 quick steps behind me. My heart was hammering in my chest. I turned around again, slower this time, sweeping my headlamp methodically across every inch of the passage. Nothing, but I could feel something there, just beyond the light. Something is watching me. That's when I heard the breathing. It was soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. The slow inhale and exhale of something large, something that was trying to be quiet. It was coming from the same direction as the footsteps, from the darkness behind me. I don't remember making the decision to run. One moment I was standing there, frozen, and the next I was moving as fast as I could back toward the entrance. The passage was too narrow to run properly, and I kept banging my shoulders and elbows against the walls, but I didn't slow down. Behind me, the footsteps matched my pace. When I ran, they ran. When I scrambled through a tight squeeze, I heard something scrambling behind me. I was trying to tell myself it was another caver, someone who'd come in after me and was playing a sick joke, but I knew that wasn't true. I'd been watching the entrance the whole time I was gearing up. Nobody else had been there, and no other caver would follow someone like this, wouldn't stay silent when I called out, wouldn't keep matching my movements in that deliberate, calculated way. I made it back to the cathedral and stopped for just a moment, gasping for air. My headlamp was bouncing around wildly, creating crazy shadows on the walls. I aimed it back at the passage I'd just come through. For just a second I saw something, a shape, tall and thin, standing at the edge of the light. It didn't move, it just stood there. And even though I couldn't see any details, couldn't make out a face or features, I knew it was looking at me. I ran. The last 200 yards to the entrance felt like miles. I was stumbling, my legs shaking from adrenaline and exertion, my breath coming in ragged gasps that echoed off the walls. The footsteps were still behind me, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always there, always matching me. When I finally saw daylight ahead, that gray circle of sky at the end of the tunnel, I nearly cried with relief. I pushed through the mountain laurel at the entrance and burst out into the afternoon air, tripping over roots and falling to my hands and knees in the dirt. I stayed there for a moment, gulping air, my whole body trembling. Then I forced myself to turn around and look back at the cave entrance. Something was standing just inside the opening, right at the edge of where daylight met darkness. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, and so pale it almost seemed to glow in the shadows. I couldn't make out details, my eyes were still adjusting to the brightness outside, but I could see its basic shape, humanoid, but wrong somehow. Too thin, too tall, proportions that didn't quite match anything that should exist. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few seconds. Then it took one step back, deeper into the cave, and vanished into the darkness. I ran to my car, threw my gear in the trunk without bothering to take off my helmet, and drove away so fast I left tire marks in the dirt. I didn't stop driving until I was back in town, parked outside a gas station, my hands still shaking too badly to hold my phone. That was 6 months ago. I haven't been back to that cave. I haven't been caving at all, actually. I sold most of my gear online, donated the rest to a college outdoor club. I told my friends I'd gotten interested in other hobbies, made up excuses about being too busy with work. Nobody questioned it. Nobody knew what had happened. But it's not over. 3 weeks after that day in the cave, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps in my hallway. The same footsteps I'd heard underground, slow, measured, deliberate. They walked from one end of the hall to the other, then stopped outside my bedroom door. I lay in bed, frozen, staring at the thin line of light under my door. I could see a shadow there, blocking part of the light. Something was standing on the other side, just standing there, not moving. It stayed for maybe 5 minutes. Then the footsteps started again, walking back down the hall. I heard my front door open and close, even though I knew I'd locked it. It's happened 7 times since then. Always in the middle of the night, always the same pattern. Footsteps in the hall, a pause outside my door, then the sound of the front door opening and closing. I've checked the locks, installed a security system, and even had a friend stay over one night to confirm I wasn't imagining it. He heard it too. We both lay there listening to something walk down my hallway and stop outside my bedroom. The next morning, he said maybe it was a neighbor or someone in the apartment next door. I didn't argue with him, but I live in a house, not an apartment. There is no next door, and the footsteps aren't coming from anywhere else. They're in my hallway, in my home. I've thought about moving. I've thought about a lot of things, but I have a feeling it wouldn't matter. Whatever I saw in that cave, whatever followed me out, it's not tied to my house or my address. It's tied to me. Sometimes, during the day, I catch movement in my peripheral vision, something tall and pale, standing just at the edge of where I can see clearly. When I turn to look directly at it, there's nothing there, but I can feel it watching me. Last week, I was at the grocery store, and I heard those footsteps behind me in the cereal aisle. I didn't turn around. I just kept walking, pushing my cart, pretending everything was normal. They followed me through the entire store, matching my pace, stopping when I stopped. Nobody else seemed to notice. Nobody else heard them. I'm writing this down because I need someone to know what happened, in case something happens to me. In case I wake up one night and the thing outside my door finally decides to come in. In case those footsteps follow me somewhere I can't come back from. I broke the rules. I went into that cave alone, and now I'm paying for it. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. The thing I can't stop thinking about. I don't think this started when I went into the cave. I think it started the first time I went there, 3 years ago. I think it's been following me all along, getting closer, learning me, waiting for the right moment. And that day in October, when I was a mile deep and alone, that was the moment it decided to make itself known. Which means it's been in my house before. It's been in my life before. I just didn't know it. And now I do. Last night, the footsteps came again. They walked down my hallway, stopped outside my door. But this time, I heard something else. A soft sound, like breathing. The same breathing I'd heard in the cave, slow and measured and patient. And then, for the first time, it spoke. It said my name, just once, in a voice that sounded like mine but wasn't, like it was using my own voice to call to me. I didn't answer. I lay there in the dark, covers pulled up to my chin, trying not to make a sound. After a long moment, the footsteps started again. They walked back down the hall. The front door opened and closed. But I don't think it left. I think it's still here, somewhere in my house, waiting, learning, getting ready. Tonight, when I go to bed, I'm going to lock my bedroom door. I'm going to push my dresser in front of it. I'm going to keep all the lights on. I don't think any of it will matter, because you can't lock out something that's already inside. My cousin Jamie and I had been exploring caves together since we were teenagers. We grew up in the mountains of western North Carolina, where every ridge and valley seemed to hide another hole in the ground waiting to be discovered. By the time we were in our 20s, we'd mapped dozens of small cave systems, most of them barely worth the effort, but it was never really about finding anything significant. It was about the exploration itself, about being the first people to see something in maybe thousands of years. The cave where it happened was one Jamie had heard about from a guy he worked with at the hardware store. The guy said his grandfather used to talk about it, said there were old carvings inside that nobody could explain. We were skeptical. People always had stories about mysterious caves that turned out to be nothing more than natural formations or scratches left by animals. But it was late March, the weather was good, and we had a Saturday with nothing else to do. The entrance was harder to find than we'd expected. We spent 2 hours hiking through dense forest, following vague directions and an even vaguer hand-drawn map. When we finally found it, hidden behind a collapsed oak tree and half covered with dead leaves, I almost suggested we turn back. There was something about the opening that felt wrong, though I couldn't have told you what. It was just a hole in the ground, maybe 4 feet across, dropping down into darkness. But standing there looking at it, I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature. Jamie was already unpacking his gear though, so I swallowed my unease and did the same. We roped down about 30 feet, our headlamps cutting through the blackness, and found ourselves in a narrow passage that twisted and turned like it couldn't decide which direction it wanted to go. The walls were close enough that we had to turn sideways in places, and I could feel the weight of all that stone above us, pressing down. We'd been moving through the cave for maybe 45 minutes when the passage suddenly opened up into a chamber. It wasn't huge, maybe 20 feet across, but after the tight confines of the tunnel, it felt massive. Our lights swept across the walls, and that's when we saw them. Symbols, hundreds of them, carved into every surface. They covered the walls from floor to ceiling, arranged in neat rows that followed the curve of the chamber. At first glance, I thought they might be Cherokee. We'd seen petroglyphs before in other caves in the area, but these were different. The lines were too clean, too precise, and they were newer. You could tell by the way the stone had weathered. These carvings couldn't have been more than 50 or 60 years old, maybe less. Jamie moved closer, running his hand over the symbols. "What do you think they mean?" I shook my head. I'd never seen anything like them. They weren't letters or numbers, at least not from any alphabet I recognized. They looked almost like circuit diagrams or technical drawings, all straight lines and angles connecting in patterns that seemed deliberate but incomprehensible. That's when I noticed they were arranged in a circle, not just on one wall, but all the way around the chamber, creating a perfect ring. And in the center of the room, directly beneath where the circle would meet, if you looked down from above, was a pit. We approached it carefully, our boots crunching on loose gravel. The pit was maybe 6 feet across, with smooth edges that looked like they'd been carved deliberately. I couldn't see the bottom. My headlamp just disappeared into blackness when I aimed it down. "How deep do you think it goes?" Jamie asked. He was leaning over the edge, trying to get a better look. "No idea. Drop a rock. See if we can hear it hit bottom." He picked up a stone and tossed it in. We waited. 5 seconds. 10. 15. No sound. "That's deep," Jamie said quietly. I was about to suggest we measure it properly with our rope when Jamie's headlamp flickered. It stuttered once, twice, then went completely dark. He swore and tapped it with his hand, but nothing happened. "Batteries must be shot," he said. "Hang on, I've got..." My light went out. The darkness in a cave isn't like darkness anywhere else. There's no adjustment period, no waiting for your eyes to adapt. Without a light source, you're blind, completely, utterly blind. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I couldn't see anything. "Jamie," my voice sounded too loud in the enclosed space. "I'm here. Hold on, let me get my backup light." I heard him fumbling with his pack, the sound of zippers and rustling fabric. I was reaching for my own backup when I heard him scream. It wasn't a scream of fear. It was worse than that. It was pain, pure and absolute, the kind of sound someone makes when something inside them breaks. I heard him fall, heard his body hit the ground, heard him gasping and choking. "Jamie, what's wrong? What happened?" My hands were shaking as I tried to find my backup light in my pack. I could hear him thrashing around in the darkness, still making those horrible sounds. I finally got the light out and my fingers found the switch. Nothing happened. I pressed it again and again, my heart hammering in my chest. Dead. The backup light was dead. Brand new batteries, tested that morning, and it was completely dead. Jamie had stopped screaming. Now he was just whimpering, a low, continuous sound that was almost worse. I could hear him breathing, fast and shallow, somewhere to my left. "Jamie, talk to me. What's happening?" "It's in my head," he whispered. His voice was thick, like he was talking through a mouthful of blood. "Oh God, it's in my head." "What is? What are you talking about?" "It spoke to me. When the lights went out, something spoke to me." I was still trying to get my light working, pressing the switch over and over, like maybe the 20th time would be the charm. What did it say? It told me, he broke off, gasping. It told me to come back. It said I have to come back. Come back where? Jamie, you're not making sense. Here, to this place. It said. Another gasp. It said there's something down there, in the pit, something waiting, and I have to come back and find it. My light suddenly blazed to life. I swung it toward where I'd heard Jamie's voice and found him on the ground, curled up in a fetal position with his hands pressed against his head. His eyes were squeezed shut and tears were streaming down his face. I dropped to my knees beside him. Jamie, look at me. He opened his eyes slowly. They were bloodshot, the pupils dilated so wide I could barely see any color. We need to leave, he whispered. Right now, before it comes back. I helped him to his feet. He was shaking so badly he could barely stand. His headlamp was still dead, so I gave him my backup, which was suddenly working fine again, and we made our way back through the passage as quickly as we could. Jamie didn't say a word the entire way. He just kept moving, one foot in front of the other, his breathing labored and his hands still trembling. When we finally climbed back out into daylight, Jamie collapsed on the ground and threw up. I sat next to him, my hand on his back, watching him heave until there was nothing left. The sunlight felt wrong somehow, too bright, too cheerful, like we'd brought something dark up with us from below. The drive home took 2 hours. Jamie stared out the window the whole time, not speaking, not even acknowledging me when I tried to talk to him. His fingers drummed against his leg in a rhythm that seemed familiar, though I couldn't place it. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. Pause. Over and over. When I dropped him off at his apartment, he finally looked at me. Don't tell anyone about this, he said. Promise me. Jamie, maybe we should talk to someone. A doctor or... Promise me. His voice was sharp, desperate. Okay, I promise. He nodded and got out of the car. I watched him walk to his door, his shoulders hunched, moving like an old man instead of the 26-year-old he was. Before he went inside, he turned and looked back at me. Even from that distance, I could see something was wrong with his eyes. They looked different somehow, darker. That was the last normal conversation I had with him. Over the next 2 weeks, Jamie changed. He stopped showing up for work. He wouldn't answer his phone. When I went to check on him, he wouldn't let me in his apartment. I could see him through the window once he was sitting at his kitchen table, surrounded by papers, writing something over and over. The same symbols we'd seen in the cave, covering every sheet, every surface, arranged in the same circular pattern. His mom called me on a Tuesday night, crying. She said Jamie had been acting strange, talking about needing to go back to the mountains, saying something was calling to him. She'd tried to get him to see a doctor, but he'd refused. She wanted to know if something had happened on our last caving trip, if maybe he'd hit his head or gotten sick. I lied to her. I said everything had been fine. I don't know why I lied. Maybe because I'd promised Jamie. Maybe because I didn't know how to explain what had really happened without sounding crazy. 3 days later, a ranger found Jamie's truck at a trailhead in the Pisgah National Forest. The ranger said it had been there at least 48 hours. They organized a search party, and I joined them, even though I knew where he'd gone. I knew, and I should have told them, but I couldn't make myself say it out loud. They searched for 5 days. They found nothing. No tracks, no signs of where he'd gone, nothing. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. Eventually, they had to call it off. Too much ground to cover, too many places a person could disappear in those mountains. I went back to the cave 2 weeks after Jamie disappeared. I told myself I was looking for answers, looking for some sign of what had happened to him. But that was a lie. I went back because I had to. Because something was pulling at me, the same way it had pulled at Jamie. The entrance was exactly where we'd left it. I roped down alone, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped my light twice. The passage felt longer than I remembered, the walls closer, the air heavier. When I reached the chamber, I stood in the entrance for a long time, my light playing over those carved symbols, before I could make myself step inside. The pit was still there, dark and waiting. I walked to the edge and looked down, and this time I saw something. A faint glow, deep down, so far away it might have been my imagination. But I don't think it was. I found Jamie's headlamp on the ground near the pit, the one that had gone dead in the darkness. I picked it up and pressed the switch. It turned on immediately, the beam strong and steady. On the wall next to where I found the headlamp, someone had carved new symbols. Fresh ones, the stone still showing pale where it had been cut. They were arranged in the same pattern as the others, but these were different. These looked like words, though I couldn't read them. Underneath the symbols, scratched hastily into the rock like an afterthought, were 4 words in English. I understand now, brother. I left the cave and never went back. I moved away from North Carolina 6 months later, left the mountains behind completely. But it doesn't matter. I can still hear it sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet. A voice that isn't a voice, speaking words that aren't words, telling me the same thing it told Jamie. Come back. There's something waiting. Come back and see. I know I will eventually. Not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Because the pull is getting stronger, and every night I dream about that pit, about the glow at the bottom, about what might be waiting down there in the dark. Jamie understood, in the end. And one day, I will too. That's what scares me most. The vertical cave in northern Georgia wasn't supposed to be dangerous. Our guide, a man named Marcus who'd been caving for 20 years, had assured us it was a straightforward descent 200 feet straight down into a chamber, then a few hours of easy horizontal exploration before we'd climb back out. It was my first time doing anything vertical in a cave, and I was nervous enough without any complications. My girlfriend Sarah had convinced me to try it, said it would be an adventure we'd remember forever. She was right about that, at least. There were 5 of us total. Me and Sarah, Marcus, and 2 other guys from Atlanta who'd hired Marcus for a guided trip. We met at a gas station just after dawn on a Saturday in late September, when the Georgia mountains were just starting to show hints of fall color. Marcus drove us down a series of increasingly rough dirt roads until we reached a clearing where the forest pressed in close on all sides. The cave entrance was a 10-minute hike from there, straight up a ridge that left all of us breathing hard by the time we reached the top. The entrance itself was a hole in the ground, maybe 6 feet across, surrounded by a natural limestone lip. You couldn't see the bottom from the surface, just darkness that seemed to swallow the morning light. Marcus set down his pack and walked around the opening, checking the anchor points he'd installed on a previous trip. That's when he stopped and stared at something on the ground. "That's weird," he said, crouching down. We gathered around him. There was another rope anchored to one of the natural rock formations near the entrance. It was old, really old. The fibers frayed and darkened with age and what looked like black mold growing along its length. The knot holding it to the anchor was something I didn't recognize, complicated and strange, not like any climbing knot I'd seen in the certification courses I'd taken. Marcus ran his hand along the rope, his face troubled. "This has been here a long time, decades maybe. I've rappelled this cave 4 times, and I've never seen this before. Maybe someone put it here recently?" Sarah suggested. "As a backup or something?" Marcus shook his head. "No one uses this entrance except me and a couple other guides. And no one would leave a rope like this. It's completely unsafe. Look at it. This thing would snap if you put any weight on it." One of the Atlanta guys, a stocky man named Tom, leaned over the edge and aimed his headlamp down. "Where does it go?" "Only one way to find out," Marcus said. But he didn't sound curious. He sounded worried. We watched as he took hold of the old rope and pulled gently. It held, but more black residue came off on his gloves. He pulled harder, hand over hand, and the rope kept coming up. After about 30 feet, he stopped and examined a section more closely. "This has been down there a long time," he said quietly. "The mold, the deterioration. I'd say this rope is at least 30 years old, maybe older." "Should we tell someone?" I asked. "Maybe it's from an old expedition or something." Marcus was quiet for a moment, staring down into the darkness. The local caving community would know about any major expeditions here. This cave wasn't even fully mapped until the late 90s. If someone was down there before that and left a rope, we'd have records. He let the rope drop back into the hole. "We'll use our own equipment. Don't touch this old rope. Don't put any weight on it. We'll report it when we get back." He set up our descent using his own rope and modern anchors, double-checking everything twice. One by one, we clipped in and rappelled down. Marcus went first, then Tom and his friend David, then Sarah. I went last, my hands sweating inside my gloves, despite the cool air rising from the cave. The descent was longer than I'd expected. The walls of the shaft were smooth limestone, worn by water over countless years, and my headlamp beam just barely reached the bottom when I was halfway down. I could see the others gathered in a chamber below, their lights creating strange shadows on the rock. When I finally reached the bottom and unclipped, my legs were shaking from the tension of controlling my descent. The chamber we'd landed in was roughly circular, maybe 40 feet across, with several dark openings leading off in different directions. Our rope hung in the center, and next to it, "Jesus," Tom said, aiming his light at the ground. The old rope was there, coiled neatly, almost precisely, in a perfect spiral on the cave floor. The end was frayed but tied in the same strange knot we'd seen at the top. And carved into the limestone next to it, the letters rough and desperate, were two words: "Help me." None of us said anything for a long moment. We just stared at those words, at that impossible rope that shouldn't have been there. "This doesn't make sense," Marcus finally said. His voice was tight. "We watched that rope. It was still anchored at the top. There's no way." He walked around the coiled rope without touching it, examining it from every angle. "This should still be hanging. We saw it. It was there when we came down." Sarah had her radio out. "Marcus, we should call this in. Something's really wrong here." He nodded and pulled out his own radio. "Base, this is Marcus. You copy?" Static. He tried again. "Base, do you copy?" More static, loud and harsh, filling the chamber with white noise. That's when we heard the sound. It came from one of the tunnels leading deeper into the cave system. A scraping, scratching sound, like something being dragged across stone. Then footsteps, deliberate, measured footsteps echoing through the darkness. "Is someone else down here?" David asked, his voice cracking slightly. Marcus had his light aimed at the tunnel entrance. "Hello? Is someone there? Do you need help?" The footsteps stopped. We waited, barely breathing. My hand found Sarah's and squeezed. She squeezed back, her palms slick with sweat. The footsteps started again, faster this time, not walking, climbing. Something was climbing toward us through the tunnels, moving with a speed that didn't seem possible on the vertical surfaces I knew existed in that direction. "We're leaving," Marcus said. "Right now. Everyone clip in." We didn't need to be told twice. Tom and David practically fought to be first on the rope. Marcus got them organized, checking their clips with shaking hands, and sent Tom up. The sound from the tunnel was getting closer, the climbing sounds mixed now with a wet breathing noise that made my skin crawl. David went next, then Sarah. I was clipping in when Sarah screamed from above, "Marcus, the rope!" I looked up. In the beam of my headlamp, I could see both ropes now, hanging side by side. Our new rope and that old moldy one. They were twisted around each other, spiraling together like a braid. We didn't. Marcus was staring up, his face pale. "No one touched it. I watched you all clip in. No one went near that old rope." The climbing sounds were very close now. I could see movement in the tunnel opening, something pale shifting in the darkness just beyond our lights. "Go," Marcus said, practically shoving me toward the rope. "Climb, don't look back, just climb." I started up, my arms burning almost immediately. Below me, I could hear Marcus clipping in, could hear his ragged breathing as he started his own ascent. And below that, I heard something else. The sound of something entering the chamber. The sound of it finding the rope. "Climb faster," Marcus shouted. I did, my muscles screaming, my hands slipping on the rope. The two ropes, ours and that impossible old one, were definitely intertwined now, woven together so thoroughly I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Above me, Sarah had reached the top and was scrambling over the edge. Tom and David were helping her, their voices urgent and frightened. The rope jerked beneath me. Not much, just a slight tug, but enough to make my heart stop. Something had grabbed it. Something was down there with Marcus, and it was on the rope. "Marcus," I screamed. "Don't stop, keep climbing." I looked down, just for a second, just long enough to see Marcus about 20 feet below me, climbing as fast as he could. And below him, in the darkness, I saw hands. Pale, long-fingered hands gripping the rope. And then a face looking up at us. Except it wasn't really a face. It was the suggestion of a face. Features that my brain tried to organize into something familiar, but couldn't quite manage. All I know for certain is that it was wrong. Fundamentally, horribly wrong. My arms found strength I didn't know I had. I climbed faster than I'd ever climbed anything, faster than should have been possible. The rim of the entrance was above me, Sarah, and the others reaching down. Their hands grabbed my harness, my arms, and hauled me up and over the edge. "Marcus," Sarah was screaming. "Hurry!" I rolled over and looked back down the hole. Marcus was almost to the top, his face a mask of terror, his eyes locked on something below him. The rope was shaking violently now, jerking back and forth like something was trying to pull it down. Tom and David grabbed Marcus's arms the second he was in reach and dragged him up and out. He crashed onto the ground next to me, gasping and trembling. For a moment, we all just lay there, listening to our own heartbeats, too scared to move. Then Marcus scrambled to his feet and ran to his pack. He pulled out a knife and went for the rope. "We have to cut it," he said. "We have to seal it off." "Wait," Tom said. "Your rope, your equipment." "Fuck the equipment." Marcus's hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the knife. "We have to cut it before." The rope started moving on its own, not jerking anymore, but sliding smoothly back down into the hole, like something was pulling it from below. Marcus grabbed it, tried to hold it, but it moved through his hands like water. We all watched in horror as the rope descended into the darkness, faster and faster, until the end whipped past us and disappeared. "No," Marcus whispered. "No, that's not possible. The anchor, the knot." He ran to where he'd tied off the rope. The anchor was still there, still secure, but there was no rope. The webbing he'd used to attach it had been cut. No, not cut, untied. The complex knot he'd tied that morning was now lying on the ground, perfectly intact, as if someone had simply worked it loose and let the rope drop. "We didn't untie that," Sarah said. Her voice sounded very small. "No one untied that." Marcus bent down and picked up something from the ground. Another piece of rope, short and frayed, with black mold growing on it. He held it up to the light. "This is from the old rope," he said. "This is a piece of the rope that was down there." We stared at it, at the proof that somehow, impossibly, the old rope and our rope had become one thing, that whatever was down in that cave had tied them together, had pulled them both down into the darkness. David had his phone out, taking pictures of the untied knot, the piece of moldy rope, the entrance itself. "We need to document this. We need to tell someone." "Tell them what?" Marcus's laugh was brittle, close to breaking. "That we rappelled into a cave and found a rope that shouldn't exist? That something down there pulled our equipment into the darkness? That we untied a knot that no one touched?" He shook his head. "They'll think we screwed up. They'll think we made mistakes and we're trying to cover it up with a crazy story." He was right, and we all knew it. What we'd experienced, what we'd seen, didn't make sense. It violated every natural law, every reasonable explanation. We could report it, but who would believe us? We hiked back to the cars in silence. Every few minutes, one of us would look back toward the ridge, toward where that hole gaped open in the earth. I kept expecting to see something following us, something pale and wrong climbing up from the depths. But there was nothing. Just forest and stone, and the normal sounds of a Georgia morning. Marcus made us promise not to mention the cave to anyone. He said he'd go back with proper authorities, would report the old rope and the carving, would make sure the entrance was properly documented. But I don't think he ever did. I think he was too scared of what they might find. Or worse, what might find them. I haven't been caving since that day. Sarah and I broke up 3 months later. We couldn't look at each other without remembering, without seeing that pale face in the darkness. Tom and David moved away from Atlanta, and I heard through mutual friends that they don't talk about outdoor activities anymore, won't even go hiking. Sometimes I dream about that rope. I dream that I'm rappelling down into darkness that never ends, and when I look up, I see that the rope above me is black with mold, frayed and ancient. And I know, in the dream, that I've been climbing for 30 years, that I've been down there all along, and everything else, the surface, the sunlight, my life was just something I imagined while hanging in the dark. I wake up from those dreams with my hands clenched, like I'm still holding onto a rope, and sometimes, just for a second, I can feel it moving through my grip, sliding down, pulling me back toward the darkness. The cave is still there, on that ridge in northern Georgia. The entrance is still open, and somewhere, 200 feet down in the dark, something is still waiting, still climbing, still patient. I wonder if our rope is still there, coiled neatly on the chamber floor. I wonder if there's a new carving next to it. I wonder what it says, but I'll never go back to find out. Some questions are better left unanswered. I was 3 years into my graduate program in biology when I got the opportunity to join Dr. Elizabeth Chen's research team. She was studying extremophile bacteria in cave systems throughout the Appalachians, looking for organisms that could survive in complete darkness with minimal nutrients. It was cutting-edge work, the kind of thing that could make a career. I jumped at the chance, even though it meant spending my summer crawling through tight spaces hundreds of feet underground. The cave system we were working in was located in southwestern Virginia, not far from the Kentucky border. It had been partially mapped in the 1,970 seconds, but there were sections that remained unexplored, side passages that the original surveyors had marked but never fully investigated. Our job was to map these sections while collecting samples of bacterial colonies, water chemistry data, and geological information. There were 5 of us on the team: Dr. Chen, myself, another grad student named Marcus, and 2 undergraduate assistants, Sophie and Jason. We'd been working in the cave for 2 weeks, going in every day for 6 to 8 hours, slowly pushing deeper into the unmapped sections. It was tedious work, but I loved it. There was something about being in a place where humans rarely went, where every rock and formation was exactly as it had been for thousands of years. On the day it happened, we were working in a section about 1.5 miles from the main entrance. Dr. Chen had identified a narrow passage that appeared to open up into something larger, and she wanted to check it out before we wrapped up for the day. The passage was tight. We had to remove our packs and push them ahead of us, but after about 30 feet of crawling, it suddenly opened up. I was the 3rd one through, following Marcus and Dr. Chen. When I stood up and turned on my headlamp, I thought at first that we'd made a mistake, that somehow we'd gotten turned around and ended up in a part of the cave that had already been mapped, because what I was seeing was impossible. The chamber was perfectly circular, not roughly circular, not approximately circular, but geometrically perfect. The walls curved in a smooth, continuous arc, and the floor was so flat and level, it looked like it had been poured, like concrete instead of natural stone. The ceiling rose about 15 feet overhead, forming a perfect dome. "This isn't natural," Marcus said quietly. His voice echoed strangely in the space, like the chamber was designed to amplify sound in specific ways. Dr. Chen was already walking the perimeter, running her hand along the wall. "It can't be artificial. We're too deep, and there's no evidence of tool marks or drilling. But you're right, this formation is highly unusual." Sophie and Jason had come through the passage behind me, and we all spread out, examining the chamber. It was maybe 50 feet across, and our lights easily reached every corner. There were no other exits that we could see, no passages leading deeper. It was just this one perfect room, hidden away in the mountain. That's when Jason called out from the center of the chamber, Guys, you should see this." We converged on his position. He was standing next to a pile of something, his headlamp aimed down at it. At first, I thought it was just rocks or debris, maybe material that had fallen from the ceiling. Then I got closer and realized what I was looking at. Clothes. A neat stack of clothing, arranged almost ceremonially in the exact center of the chamber. There were jackets and shirts, pants and boots, even a few hats. They were folded and stacked with care, like someone had taken the time to organize them properly. "What the hell?" Marcus crouched down, shining his light over the pile. "Why would there be clothes down here?" Dr. Chen pulled out her camera and started taking photos. "Don't touch anything yet. This could be evidence of..." She paused. "I don't know what this is evidence of, but we need to document it before we disturb it." I was examining the clothes more closely, trying to understand what I was seeing. Some of them looked old, really old. There was a wool coat that looked like something from the 19th century, with bone buttons and hand-stitched seams. Next to it was a leather boot, the kind with laces that went halfway up the calf, worn smooth with age. But there were modern clothes too. A North Face jacket, the tag still attached. A pair of Nike sneakers that couldn't have been more than a few years old. A baseball cap with a faded logo I recognized from a local hardware store. "These are from different time periods," I said. "Some of this stuff is antique, but some of it's brand new." Sophie had moved around to the other side of the pile. "There's a name on this jacket," she said, pointing, "stitched into the lining." We gathered around to look. It was a denim jacket, worn but not ancient, with a name embroidered in white thread on the inside collar. Thomas Brennan. The name hit me like a physical blow. I'd grown up in Virginia, had spent summers in these mountains, and I remembered the story. Thomas Brennan had disappeared while hiking in 2003. It had been a major news story at the time, a college student from Richmond who'd gone out for a day hike and never came back. They'd searched for weeks, found his car at a trailhead, but no other trace of him. "I know that name," I said quietly. "He went missing 20 years ago." "Doctor?" Chen was taking more photos, her face pale in the reflected light. "We need to notify the authorities immediately. This is a crime scene, or a burial site, or..." She stopped, looking around the chamber. "But where are the bodies?" That was the question that made everything worse. There were clothes here from multiple people, spanning more than a century. But there were no bodies, no bones, no remains of any kind. Just the clothes, neatly folded and stacked, as if their owners had simply stepped out of them and walked away. Marcus was using his tape measure to document the pile, working methodically despite the tremor in his hands. I could see him counting under his breath. "I'm seeing at least 15 distinct outfits here," he said. "Maybe more. Some of them are layered." We spent the next hour documenting everything we could. Photos from every angle, measurements, and notes about the condition and apparent age of each item. Dr. Chen collected a few samples, fabric, fibers, dust from the floor around the pile, and sealed them in sterile bags. No one wanted to disturb the arrangement more than necessary. It was Sophie who noticed the pattern. She'd been walking around the chamber, studying the walls, when she called us over. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a spot on the wall about 4 feet up from the floor. There were scratches in the stone. Not random scratches, deliberate marks, carved with something sharp. They formed a pattern, a series of vertical lines grouped together. Tally marks. We found more of them as we searched. They were scattered around the chamber at irregular intervals, always at about the same height, like someone had been making marks as they walked around the perimeter. I counted them up. 67 marks in total. 67 what? Jason asked. No one had an answer. We left the cave at dusk, exhausted and disturbed. Dr. Chen called the state police from her car, and they said they'd send someone out first thing in the morning. We were told not to go back into the cave until they'd had a chance to investigate. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those clothes, about Thomas Brennan's jacket sitting in a pile in a chamber that shouldn't exist. I kept wondering what had happened to him, to all of them. Where were the bodies? Why were the clothes so carefully arranged? And those tally marks, 67 of them. Counting what? The police arrived at 8 the next morning, along with a cave rescue team and a forensics unit. Dr. Chen led them to the entrance, gave them copies of our photos and our map showing how to reach the chamber. They told us to wait at the surface while they investigated. They were down there for 6 hours. When they finally came back up, the lead investigator looked confused and frustrated. He asked Dr. Chen to show him the map again and asked her to describe the exact route we'd taken. She went through it step by step, pointing out each landmark and turn. "Ma'am," he said finally, "we followed your directions exactly. We found the narrow passage you described, and we went through it, but there's no chamber on the other side. The passage ends in a collapse. It looks like the ceiling came down, maybe years ago. There's no way through." Dr. Chen's face went white. "That's impossible. We were just there yesterday, all 5 of us. We took photos. We spent over an hour documenting. I believe you were in a chamber," the investigator said carefully. "But we can't find it. Maybe you took a different route than you remember, or maybe there's another entrance we haven't found yet. But the passage you described is blocked." They spent 3 more days searching. They brought in additional teams, cavers who knew the system intimately, geologists who studied the maps and tried to figure out where else the chamber could be. They found nothing. The passage that we'd crawled through, that had led us to that impossible room, was sealed solid with tons of collapsed limestone. The official conclusion was that we'd gotten disoriented, that we'd actually found the chamber through a different route and had misremembered the path in our notes. The photos we'd taken were examined and cataloged, but without being able to locate the chamber itself, there wasn't much the police could do. They filed a report and moved on to cases they could actually investigate. But I know what I saw. I know where we were and how we got there. I have the photos on my phone, and I look at them sometimes when I can't sleep. The perfectly circular chamber, the pile of clothes is in the exact center. Thomas Brennan's jacket with his name stitched in white thread. I've studied the photos for hours, zooming in on every detail, trying to find something I missed. In one image, taken from the entrance passage looking into the chamber. You can see all 5 of us spread out around the room, our headlamps creating overlapping circles of light. We look small in that space, dwarfed by the perfect geometry of it. But there's something else in that photo. I didn't notice it until months later, after I'd given up trying to convince anyone that the chamber was real. In the upper left corner, in the darkness beyond our lights, there's a shape. It's blurry and indistinct, but it's there. It looks almost like a person, standing in the shadows, watching us. I've shown the photo to image analysis experts, asked them to enhance it, to tell me what I'm seeing. They say it's probably just a rock formation or a trick of the light and shadows. They say our brains are wired to see faces and human forms in random patterns. But I was there. I know what that chamber felt like. It felt wrong. It felt like a place that existed outside the normal rules. A place where things accumulated, clothes without bodies, tally marks counting something we couldn't see. Dr. Chen quit cave research after that summer. She never published the data we'd collected, never wrote the papers she'd been planning. Last I heard, she was teaching introductory biology at a community college, staying far away from any work that required going underground. Marcus finished his PhD and moved to California. We don't keep in touch, but I saw him present at a conference once. When he mentioned his cave research during his talk, his hands shook, and he moved through that section as quickly as possible. Sophie and Jason both changed their majors. Neither of them works in science anymore. And me? I finished my degree, but I never went into another cave. I work in a lab now, studying bacteria cultures in petri dishes, nice and safe and above ground. I tell myself I'm fine, that I've moved on. But sometimes I dream about that chamber. I dream that I'm standing in the center, next to that pile of clothes, and I'm taking off my jacket, folding it neatly, adding it to the stack, and in the dream, I understand why. I understand what the chamber is for, what those tally marks are counting, and I know that one day I'll go back, not because I want to, but because I have to, because the chamber is still there, somewhere in the mountain, waiting in the dark, still collecting, and it's not done yet. The old man at the gas station warned me about the whispering passage. I'd stopped to fill up my truck and ask for directions, and when I mentioned I was heading out to explore some of the cave systems near Pikeville, his face changed. He set down the coffee pot he'd been holding and looked at me like I'd just told him I was planning to walk into a wood chipper. "You ain't talking about that cave up on Mullins Ridge, are you?" he asked. I pulled out my map and showed him. He glanced at it for maybe half a second before pushing it back across the counter. "That's the one, the whispering passage. You don't want to go there, son." I'd heard variations of this conversation before. Every region had its haunted cave, its cursed hollow, its stretch of road where strange things supposedly happened. I'd been caving for 15 years and had checked out dozens of these cursed locations. They were always just caves, interesting geology, sure, but nothing supernatural. I thanked the old man for his concern and went on my way. My buddy Rick met me at the trailhead around noon. We'd been caving together since college, had explored systems all over the eastern United States. Rick was more experienced than me, more cautious, and I trusted him completely. If something went wrong underground, there was no one else I'd rather have at my back. The hike to the cave entrance took about 45 minutes, following an old logging road that had been reclaimed by the forest. The entrance itself was unremarkable, just a dark opening in a limestone outcropping, partially hidden by rhododendron bushes. There was no official marker, no warning signs, nothing to indicate this was the cave the locals feared. We geared up and headed in. The first section was easy, a wide passage with a mostly level floor. Our headlamps cut through the darkness, illuminating flowstone formations and the occasional cluster of cave pearls in shallow pools. It was beautiful in the way caves always were, alien and untouched. Rick was leading, moving at his usual careful pace, checking his compass and making notes on his waterproof map. I followed about 10 feet behind, taking photos and trying to match what we were seeing with the rough survey someone had posted online. The passage continued straight for maybe a quarter mile before it started to curve and descend. We'd been underground for about 30 minutes when I first heard it. A soft sound, almost musical, like wind chimes in a breeze. I stopped and listened, trying to figure out where it was coming from. "You hear that?" I called to Rick. He paused and tilted his head. "Hear what?" "That sound, like wind moving through the cave." Rick was quiet for a moment, listening. Then he shook his head. I don't hear anything, but air currents can create all kinds of noises in cave systems. Probably just that. We kept moving. The passage was getting narrower now, the walls pressing in on both sides. The sound continued, and as we went deeper, it started to change. It didn't sound as much like wind anymore. It sounded more like four whispers. That's when I understood why they called it the Whispering Passage. The voices were faint at first, just barely audible over our breathing and the sound of our boots on stone. But the farther we descended, the clearer they became. I couldn't make out words yet, just the rhythm and cadence of human speech echoing through the tunnels from somewhere ahead. Rick, I said, someone else is down here. He stopped and turned to look at me. What? Listen, there are voices. Someone's talking up ahead. Rick stood perfectly still, his headlamp casting strange shadows on the walls. After a long moment, he said, I don't hear anyone. Are you sure you're not just hearing echoes of us? But I could hear them clearly now. Multiple voices, overlapping, all speaking at once. They were coming from deeper in the cave, from the darkness beyond our lights. There's definitely someone down here, I insisted. Maybe cavers who got lost or… Dan. Rick's voice was firm. There's no one else in this cave. I'm not hearing anything except you and me. That should have been my first clue that something was wrong. Rick had better hearing than I did. If there were actually people down there, he would have heard them before I did. But in the moment, I was too focused on the voices to think clearly. We continued deeper, and the voices got louder. They were clearer now, distinct enough that I started to pick out individual words. Help, lost, please, over and over, echoing through the passage. Then I heard my name, Dan. It was barely a whisper, but unmistakable. A woman's voice, soft and familiar. Dan, please. I froze. Rick kept walking for a few steps before he realized I'd stopped. What's wrong? That voice, I said. That was Sarah. That was my wife. Rick walked back to where I stood. He put his hand on my shoulder and looked me in the eye. Dan, Sarah is at home in Columbus. She's not in this cave. I know, but… The voice came again, louder this time. Dan, I need you. I'm lost. Please help me. It sounded exactly like her. The same inflection, the same slight southern accent she'd never quite lost, even after 20 years in Ohio. My rational brain was telling me this was impossible, that there was no way Sarah could be down here, but the voice was so clear, so real. Please, Dan, I can't find my way out. I started walking toward the voice. Rick grabbed my arm, but I shook him off. Someone needs help, I said. We have to. No one is down there. Rick's voice was sharp, almost angry. Dan, listen to me. This is what the locals warned about. This is why they call it the Whispering Passage. You're hearing things that aren't there. But then I heard another voice, a child's voice, high and frightened. Dad, Dad, where are you? My son. That was my son's voice. Tommy, who was 13 years old and should have been at baseball practice right now, was calling for me from somewhere in the darkness. Tommy? My voice cracked. Tommy, stay where you are. I'm coming. Dad, I'm scared. I can't see anything. I pulled away from Rick and started moving faster, almost jogging through the passage. Behind me, I could hear Rick calling my name, but his voice sounded distant and unimportant. Tommy needed me. Sarah needed me. They were lost in the dark, and I had to find them. The passage opened up into a larger chamber, and the voices surrounded me now. Sarah on my left, Tommy on my right, and then another voice I hadn't heard in 8 years. My father Wad died of a heart attack while I was away at a conference. His voice was exactly as I remembered it, rough from years of smoking, with that slight rasp he'd developed near the end. Danny boy, he said. That's what he'd always called me. Danny boy, I've been waiting for you. Dad? Tears were streaming down my face, though I didn't remember starting to cry. Dad, you're not… I'm right here, son. Come find me. Come deeper into the cave. I have so much to tell you. I was walking again, following the voices deeper into the chamber. They were all calling to me now. All the people I loved. All the people I'd lost or feared losing. My mother, who had Alzheimer's and barely remembered my name anymore. My best friend from high school, who died in a car accident. They were all here, all waiting for me in the darkness. Something hit me hard from behind, and I went down. Rick had tackled me, his arms wrapped around my chest, holding me against the cave floor. I struggled, trying to break free, trying to get back to the voices. "Let me go!" I was screaming now, though I had no memory of raising my voice. "They need me. I have to help them." "There's no one there." Rick was yelling too, his voice ragged. "Dan, please, you have to fight this. There's no one there." But I could see them now. Shapes in the darkness, just beyond the reach of our headlamps. Sarah standing with her arms outstretched. Tommy crying, his face pale and scared. My father, smiling that sad smile he'd given me the last time I saw him alive. "Come to us, Dan," Sarah said. "It's so dark here, so cold. We need you." Rick was dragging me backward, and I was fighting him with everything I had. I didn't understand why he was doing this, why he was keeping me from my family. They needed me. They were lost and alone, and I was the only one who could help them. We crashed through the narrow passage we'd come through earlier, Rick hauling me like a sack of grain, my hands clawing at the floor, trying to find purchase. The voices were getting fainter, more desperate. They were begging me to come back, telling me not to leave them alone in the dark. "I'm sorry," I was sobbing. "I'm so sorry. I have to go back. Please, Rick, let me go back." Rick didn't answer. He just kept dragging me. His breathing labored, his grip never loosening. We went through passages I didn't remember, around corners that seemed wrong, but Rick kept moving with absolute certainty, following some path only he could see. And then, suddenly, we were at the entrance. Daylight was streaming in, bright and wrong and painful. Rick dragged me outside and we both collapsed on the ground, gasping for air. I don't know how long we lay there. The sun was in a different position when I finally sat up, so it must have been at least an hour. My face was wet with tears, my throat raw from screaming. Rick was sitting a few feet away, his back against a tree, watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear, maybe, or pity. "What happened?" My voice came out as a croak. "You don't remember?" I tried to think back, tried to piece together the events in the cave. I remembered the voices, remembered hearing Sarah and Tommy and my father. I remembered trying to go deeper. But everything after that was fragments, disconnected images that didn't quite make sense. "You were talking to them," Rick said quietly. "The whole time I was dragging you out, you were having a conversation with people who weren't there. You were telling your wife about your day at work. You were helping your son with his homework. You were laughing at something your father said." He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. It was the most disturbing thing I've ever seen. I touched my face, and my hand came away wet. I'd been crying, had been crying for what must have been close to an hour, and I had no memory of it. "The locals were right," Rick continued. "About that cave, about the voices. Whatever's in there, it gets inside your head. It finds the people you love, the people you miss, and it uses them against you. It would have kept you walking deeper and deeper until..." He didn't finish the sentence. We packed up our gear in silence. Rick helped me to the truck, and I noticed he kept one hand on my arm the whole way, like he was afraid I might bolt back toward the cave. Maybe he was right to worry. Even now, sitting in the bright afternoon sunlight, I could still hear them. Faint whispers at the edge of my perception, calling my name, begging me to come back. The drive home took 6 hours, and Rick wouldn't let me behind the wheel. He said I kept drifting toward the shoulder, like I was trying to turn the truck around without realizing it. I don't remember doing that. I don't remember much of anything from that drive except the voices, always there in the back of my mind, waiting for a moment of weakness. It's been 3 months since that day in the Whispering Passage. Rick hasn't returned my calls. The last text I got from him just said, "I can't do this anymore, man. I'm sorry. I understand." I wouldn't want to cave with me either, because the voices never stopped. They're quieter now, easier to ignore most of the time, but they're always there, especially at night when the house is silent and I'm alone with my thoughts. Sarah's voice calling from the basement, Tommy's voice from the attic, my father's voice from the garage. I know they're not real. I know my wife is asleep in the bed next to, and my son is away at college, and my father is 8 years dead. I know all of that intellectually, but knowing something and feeling something are different things, and the voices feel so real. Last week, I caught myself planning a return trip to the cave. I had my gear laid out, routes mapped, and justifications prepared for why I needed to go back. It was Sarah who found me, asked me what I was doing. I told her I was just organizing my equipment, but she could see the map on my laptop and could see the route highlighted to the Whispering Passage. She made me promise I'd never go back there. I promised, but we both knew I was lying, because they're still calling for me, still waiting in the dark, still telling me they need my help, that they're lost, that I'm the only one who can save them. And every day, it gets a little harder to remember that they're not real. Every day, the cave pulls at me a little stronger. And one day, I know I'm going to go back. Not because I want to, but because eventually, the voices will be louder than everything else. Louder than reason, louder than fear, louder than the life I've built in the sunlight. The cave is patient, it can wait, and it knows that eventually, I'll come back to it. They all do, in the end. The cave system outside Chattanooga wasn't supposed to be anything special. Our guide, a man named Dale, who'd been leading cave tours for 30 years, had described it as a good beginner's wet cave, meaning we'd be wading through water for most of the trip, but nothing too technical or dangerous. My girlfriend Rachel and I had signed up along with 4 other people, a couple from Atlanta and 2 college students doing some kind of geology project. We met Dale at a ranger station early on a Saturday morning in July. The humidity was already oppressive, the kind that makes your clothes stick to your skin before you've even started moving. Dale went through the usual safety briefing: stay together, don't touch the formations, watch your head, and then we loaded into his van for the drive to the trailhead. The hike to the cave entrance was short, maybe 15 minutes down a well-maintained trail. The entrance itself was at the bottom of a small ravine, a dark opening about 5 feet high that exhaled cool, damp air. We could hear water running somewhere inside, and Dale explained that an underground stream ran through the entire system, fed by rainfall from the ridges above. Water level's been low this summer, he said as we pulled on our helmets and checked our headlamps. Should be an easy trip. We'll go in about half a mile, see some nice formations, maybe spot some cave salamanders if we're lucky. The first section of the cave was exactly what Dale had promised. We waded through ankle-deep water, our lights illuminating crystalline flowstone and delicate soda straws hanging from the ceiling. Rachel kept stopping to take photos, fascinated by the alien beauty of it all. The college students were taking samples of the water, testing pH levels and documenting everything in waterproof notebooks. About 20 minutes in, the water started getting deeper. By the time we reached what Dale called the Narrows, we were wading through water that came up to our knees, sometimes our thighs. The passage had gotten smaller too, the walls pressing in on both sides, the ceiling low enough that we had to duck in places. That's when I noticed the handprints. They were on the wall to my right, about 2 feet above the water line. At first, I thought they were just natural formations, patterns in the mud that happened to look like hands. But when I aimed my headlamp directly at them, there was no mistaking what I was seeing. These were handprints, clear, distinct impressions of human hands pressed into the soft mud that coated the limestone walls. "Dale," I called out, "what are these?" He stopped and turned back, his light following mine to the wall. His expression changed immediately, the easy confidence replaced by something I couldn't quite read. Confusion, maybe, or concern. "Huh," he said, moving closer. That's strange." The Atlanta couple had noticed them too, now, and we all gathered around, our lights creating a cone of illumination on the wall. The handprints were everywhere once you started looking. They covered the walls on both sides, some at eye level, others higher up near the ceiling. There had to be dozens of them in just this section alone. "Are these from other cavers?" Rachel asked. Dale shook his head slowly. "No, we don't touch the walls in caves. Oils from your skin can damage the formations. Any reputable guide would never let their group do this." He reached out but stopped short of actually touching the prints. "Besides, look at the mud. It's still wet. These are fresh." One of the college students, a young woman named Amy, was taking pictures with a waterproof camera. "Some of these are really small," she said, aiming her light at a cluster of prints near the water. "Like a kid's hands. Did you bring a group with children through here recently?" "I never take kids into wet caves," Dale said. He was moving along the wall now, examining the prints more closely. I've never seen anything like this. I've been guiding this cave for 15 years, and these were definitely not here last week." His partner, a guy named Josh, had moved ahead to where the passage continued. Guys? They're up here too, everywhere." We followed him into the next section, and he was right. The handprints covered every available surface. The walls, the ceiling, even the floor under the water, where the mud was thick enough to hold an impression. They were layered in places, new prints pressed over old ones, creating a chaotic collage of human hands. Some were normal-sized, the kind you'd expect from an adult, but others were wrong, too small, like they came from children, or too large, with fingers that seemed too long, too thin. "This doesn't make sense," Dale muttered. He had his camera out now, taking photos from multiple angles. "There's no way a group came through here without me knowing. This is private property, and the landowner only lets me use it for guided tours." Rachel had gone quiet beside me. She was staring at a handprint on the wall near her head, and when I looked closer, I understood why. This one was huge, at least twice the size of a normal human hand. The fingers were elongated, stretching up the wall in a way that made them look almost spider-like. "What the hell made that?" she whispered. Dale didn't answer. He was looking at something else now, his light fixed on a section of ceiling about 10 feet ahead. I followed his gaze and felt my stomach drop. There were handprints on the ceiling, dozens of them, pressed into the mud as if someone had been crawling along the roof of the cave, their hands pressing down while their bodies hung suspended over the water. "We should go back," Amy said. Her voice had gone tight, controlled. "Right now." Dale nodded, but he was still taking photos, his hands moving mechanically even as his face showed growing unease. Yeah, you're right. We need to document this and report it, but we should." "Dale." It was Josh, and his voice had an edge to it I hadn't heard before. "The prints. Look at the prints." We all turned our lights to where he was pointing. The passage continued ahead, narrowing even further, and the walls were absolutely covered in handprints. But these were different from the ones we'd already seen. The mud here was darker, wetter. These prints were so fresh that they were still glistening. "Something was just here," Josh said quietly. "Like recently, maybe minutes ago." We stood there in the knee-deep water, our lights playing over those impossibly fresh handprints, and I felt the cave suddenly seem much smaller, much more confining. The air was thick and hard to breathe. The sound of water dripping echoed strangely, like footsteps. "We're leaving," Dale said. His voice had lost all its earlier authority, and now just sounded tired, afraid. "Everyone turn around slowly and head back the way we came. Stay close together." We didn't need to be told twice. We turned as one unit and started wading back through the water. I kept my light aimed ahead, watching for the route, but I couldn't help glancing at the walls as we passed. The handprints were still there, of course, but now they seemed different. More deliberate, more purposeful, like they were showing us a path, or marking territory. We'd gone maybe 50 feet when Rachel grabbed my arm. "Stop," she hissed. "Stop, look up." I raised my light to the ceiling, my breath caught in my throat. There were new handprints directly above us. Fresh ones, the mud still wet and dripping. They formed a trail across the ceiling, leading from somewhere ahead of us back to where we'd just been. As if something had crawled above us while we were examining the walls. As if it had been right there, hanging over our heads, watching us. "Oh God," Amy said. "Oh God, it was right there." The mud was still dripping. I watched a drop fall and hit the water between us, creating a small ripple. The print was still warm. I could feel heat radiating from it, even from several feet below. "Run?" I don't remember making the decision to run. One moment we were standing there, staring at those impossible handprints on the ceiling, and the next we were crashing through the water, our lights bouncing wildly, our breathing ragged with panic. Dale was shouting something about staying together, but his voice was lost in the sound of splashing and the thundering of blood in my ears. The passage seemed to go on forever. Every turn revealed more handprints, always fresh, always wet. The mud dripping like whatever had made them was still moving through the cave, staying just ahead of us or just behind us. I couldn't tell which was worse. Rachel fell once, going under completely, and I hauled her up by her backpack straps. She came up sputtering and sobbing, and we kept moving. The couple from Atlanta had pulled ahead, their lights growing distant as they pushed toward the entrance. Josh was behind us, urging everyone forward, his voice cracking with fear. When we finally burst out of the cave entrance into the bright Tennessee sun, we didn't stop. We kept running up the trail, our boots squelching, our clothes soaked, until we reached the parking area, and collapsed next to Dale's van. Nobody spoke for a long time. We just sat there, gasping for air, shaking with adrenaline and terror. Eventually, Dale pulled out his phone and called the ranger station. His hands were trembling so badly that he had to dial twice. That evening, after we'd given statements to the rangers and been checked over by paramedics, Dale asked if he could see the photos Rachel and Amy had taken. We gathered in the ranger station office, huddled around a laptop, scrolling through the images. The handprints were clearly visible in every shot. The photos documented everything we'd seen, the small prints, the large ones, the impossible placement on the ceiling. But there was something else. Amy noticed it first. She was clicking through her photos, and she suddenly stopped, her face going pale. "What is that?" She pointed to the background of one of the images. At first, I couldn't see what she meant. The photo showed a section of wall covered in handprints, well lit and in focus. But then Dale zoomed in on the darkness behind us. In the part of the passage our lights hadn't quite reached. There was something there, a shape, pale and indistinct, standing in the shadows. It was humanoid, but wrong somehow. The proportions not quite right. The more I stared at it, the less it looked like a person, and the more it looked like something pretending to be a person. We checked the other photos. It was in every single one. Sometimes small and distant, sometimes larger, always in the background, always just out of focus. In one image, the last one Amy had taken, right before we started running, it was close. So close, I could almost make out details. Long fingers pressed against the cave wall. A pale, elongated body. A head tilted at an angle that made my neck hurt just looking at it. And in that last photo, if you looked very carefully, you could see that the thing was looking at the camera, at us, with eyes that caught the flash and reflected it back, bright and animal and wrong. The rangers closed the cave the next day. They sent in a team with high-powered lights and cameras, hoping to find some explanation for the handprints. They found them, of course, impossible to miss. But they also found something else. Deep in the section we'd never reached, past where we'd turned back, the passage opened into a large chamber. The walls of that chamber were covered floor to ceiling in handprints. Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. Layered so thickly in places that the original rock wasn't even visible. And in the center of the chamber, in the mud of the floor, they found tracks. Footprints leading from the water's edge to the walls and back again. The prints were human-shaped, but too long, with toes that spread too wide. The rangers took casts, took photos, and collected samples. The official report called them anomalous and requiring further study. The cave remains closed. Dale quit guiding last month. He told me over the phone that he hasn't been able to sleep, that every time he closes his eyes, he sees those handprints, fresh and wet, appearing on his bedroom walls. He's moving to Arizona, he said. Somewhere dry, somewhere with no caves. Rachel and I broke up a few weeks after the incident. We tried to make it work, but every time we looked at each other, we saw that cave, those handprints, that pale shape in the darkness of the photos. Some things you can't come back from together. I still have the photos on my phone. I know I should delete them, but I can't bring myself to do it. Sometimes late at night, I zoom in on that last image, the one where the thing is so close, trying to make out details that will never quite resolve into clarity. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed in the dark, I think about those handprints on the ceiling, how they were warm, how the mud was still dripping, how something had been right there above us, close enough to touch, watching us examine the marks it had left behind. I wonder if it's still there, in that wet cave in Tennessee, still pressing its hands against the walls and ceiling, still leaving marks for the next group to find. And I wonder if those marks are warnings, or invitations. I've always been particular about sound. As an audio engineer, I spent 20 years recording everything from symphonies to podcasts, learning how different spaces shaped and colored noise. Caves were particularly interesting. The acoustics were unlike anything you'd find in a studio. Natural reverb chambers, some of them, with decay times that could stretch for seconds. I'd been planning this trip for months, ever since I'd read about an unmapped cave system in the mountains of western North Carolina. Perfect isolation, no traffic noise, no ambient sound pollution, just pure, natural acoustics. The cave entrance was exactly where the forum post had said it would be, hidden behind a rockfall on private land that the owner rarely visited. I'd gotten permission through a series of emails, signed a liability waiver, and driven out on a Tuesday morning when I knew I'd have the place to myself. My plan was simple: go in about half a mile, set up my equipment, record some test tones and ambient sound, maybe get some samples I could use in future projects. I'd been caving before, nothing too technical, but enough to know the basics. I had proper gear, backup lights, a GPS beacon, and enough battery power to run my equipment for hours. I'd told my wife Jennifer where I was going, left her the GPS coordinates, promised to be back before dark. Everything by the book. The cave started as a wide passage that sloped gently downward. The walls were limestone, smooth from centuries of water flow, and my footsteps echoed pleasantly as I walked. I was maybe 20 minutes in when I found the spot I wanted: a natural chamber about the size of a living room, with a ceiling that arched overhead in a near-perfect dome. The acoustics would be incredible here. I set up my portable recorder and ran a few basic tests, clapping my hands and listening to how the sound bounced back. The reverb was beautiful, clean and long without being muddy. I pulled out my notes and started running through my checklist, recording different frequencies, measuring decay times, documenting everything. Then I decided to test the vocal range. I took a deep breath and shouted, "Hello." The echo came back exactly as expected. Hello, hello, hello. Each repetition getting softer, the sound decaying naturally as it bounced off the distant walls. I smiled and made a note. This was exactly what I'd hoped for. Then I heard it again. Hello. I frowned. The echo should have died out by now, but I heard it again, clear and distinct, like I just shouted. Hello. Same volume as the original, same inflection. I stood still, listening. The echo came again. Hello, and again. Hello. Each time exactly the same, not getting softer, not fading away, just repeating over and over, my voice calling out in the darkness. I checked my recorder. It was still running, the levels showing nothing but silence between the repeating echoes. But I could hear it clearly. Hello, hello, hello. That's not possible, I said out loud, more to myself than anything. The words came back. That's not possible. But I heard them 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, each repetition overlapping with the last, my voice speaking over itself, creating a dissonant chorus. I hadn't moved. I hadn't made any more sound. But the echoes kept coming, and now they were saying things I hadn't said. Help me. It was my voice, but I hadn't spoken those words. Help me. Someone help me. My skin went cold. I grabbed my recorder and started packing up my equipment, my hands shaking. My voice kept calling out. Please, I'm lost. Can anyone hear me? Stop it, I said. Stop. The echo seized on those words, repeating them dozens of times, the sound building on itself until the chamber was full of my voice saying stop in every possible inflection and volume. Some were whispers, some were screams. I grabbed my pack and started moving back toward the entrance. The echoes followed me, pouring out of the chamber and down the passage. They were no longer just repeating my words. They were forming new sentences, new phrases, using my voice to say things I'd never said. Turn back, my voice called from behind me. Don't leave. Stay here. Stay with us. Us. It had said us, but I was alone. I started moving faster, my headlamp bouncing as I jogged through the passage. The echoes were coming from everywhere now, from ahead and behind, from side passages I hadn't noticed on the way in. My voice was calling out names: Sarah, Michael, Elizabeth, Thomas, names I didn't recognize, voices screaming and crying and begging. I can't find the way out, my voice sobbed from somewhere to my left. I've been walking for hours, for days. Please, someone help me. I broke into a run, my pack bouncing against my back, my boots slipping on the wet stone. The echoes were getting louder, more frantic. My voice was screaming now, raw and desperate, the sound so loud it was physically painful. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside my head somehow, bypassing my ears entirely. Let me out, my voice shrieked. Please let me out. I don't want to die down here. I don't want to die alone. I stumbled and fell, my hands scraping against the rock. When I tried to push myself back up, I realized I couldn't hear my own breathing anymore. The echoes had become a solid wall of sound, hundreds of versions of my voice, all speaking at once, overlapping and harmonizing, and creating sounds that no human throat should be able to produce. And then, underneath all of it, I heard something else. Other voices. Not mine. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All different ages and genders. All speaking in overlapping echoes. They were saying the same things my voice was saying, calling for help, screaming in fear, begging to be let out. Like the cave had collected them all, had been collecting them for years, maybe centuries. I forced myself to my feet and ran. The passage seemed longer than it had on the way in, the walls pressing closer, the ceiling getting lower. The echoes were so loud now that I couldn't hear my own footfalls, couldn't hear anything except that terrible chorus of voices. My voice and others, all trapped in this stone, all crying out to no one. When I finally saw daylight ahead, I nearly sobbed with relief. I crashed through the entrance and fell to my hands and knees in the dirt outside, gasping for air. The echoes followed me out. I could still hear them, though they were getting softer now, fading as the distance from the cave increased. I tried to call for help, tried to shout, but nothing came out. My throat worked, my lips moved, but there was no sound. My voice was gone, completely gone. I made it back to my truck and fumbled for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly it took 3 tries to unlock it. I pulled up Jennifer's contact and tried to call, but when she answered, I couldn't make a sound. I could hear her saying hello, asking if I was okay, her voice getting more worried with each unanswered question. I hung up and sent her a text. Coming home. Something wrong. Can't talk. The drive back took 2 hours. I kept the windows down, kept the radio off, listening to the silence where my voice should have been. Twice I pulled over and tried to speak, tried to force sound out, but nothing worked. My vocal cords felt paralyzed, frozen, like they'd forgotten how to function. Jennifer was waiting on the porch when I pulled in. She took one look at my face and ran to the truck. Her mouth was moving, asking questions, but I just shook my head and pointed to my throat. She understood immediately, voice gone, and helped me inside. We spent the evening communicating through notes and text messages. I tried to explain what had happened in the cave, but it sounded insane, even written down. Echoes that wouldn't stop. My voice saying things I hadn't said. Other voices joining in. She listened or read with growing concern, and eventually convinced me to go to the emergency room. The doctor found nothing wrong. My vocal cords looked normal, no damage, no inflammation. He said it was probably psychological, stress-induced aphonia, and that it should resolve on its own in a day or 2. He prescribed anti-anxiety medication and sent me home. For 3 days, I was completely silent. I couldn't make a sound, not a whisper, not a cough, nothing. Jennifer would look at me sometimes with this expression I couldn't read, something between pity and fear. On the 3rd night, I woke up at 2 a.m. and found her standing in the doorway of our bedroom, just watching me sleep. When she saw I was awake, she quickly smiled and said she'd heard a noise, wanted to make sure I was okay, but I didn't believe her. On the 4th morning, my voice came back. I woke up and immediately knew something had changed. I could feel my vocal cords working again, could feel air moving across them. I sat up in bed and tried to speak. "Jennifer," I said, "I can talk." She appeared in the doorway, still in her bathrobe, and her face went pale. "What did you say?" I said, "I can talk. My voice is back." She stared at me for a long moment, her hand gripping the doorframe. That's not your voice." "What do you mean?" "Of course it is." "No." She shook her head, taking a step back. "That's not how you sound. That's not..." She stopped, her eyes filling with tears. "Who are you?" I got up and went to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror. Same face, same eyes, same body. But when I spoke, "It's me, it's still me." The voice that came out was wrong. It sounded like me, almost. Same pitch, same general quality. But there was something off about it, some subtle difference I couldn't quite identify. Like listening to a recording of yourself and realizing you don't sound the way you think you do, except worse. This wasn't just unfamiliar, this was wrong. Jennifer wouldn't come near me that day. She stayed in the guest room, communicated through text messages even though we were in the same house. She kept saying I didn't sound right, that my voice was different, that it scared her. I tried to convince her it was just temporary, that my voice would fully recover and go back to normal, but I didn't believe it myself. I went back to the doctor. He examined me again, recorded my voice, and compared it to the recording he'd made during my first visit. On the spectrograph, they looked nearly identical, Same fundamental frequency, same harmonics, same formant patterns. Medically, scientifically, it was the same voice. But it wasn't. I could hear the difference even if the machines couldn't. Every time I spoke, I heard echoes underneath my words, faint, barely audible. But there, other voices, speaking along with mine, creating harmonics that shouldn't exist. It's been 6 months now. Jennifer moved out after 2 weeks. She couldn't stand to be in the same room with me when I spoke. She said it was like living with a stranger who was wearing my face. We're separated now, probably heading toward divorce. I quit my job. I couldn't do audio engineering anymore. Every recording I made had those strange harmonics in it, those phantom voices. My colleagues thought my equipment was faulty. They couldn't hear what I heard, but I can hear it. Every time I speak, every time I make a sound, I hear them. The voices from the cave still echoing, still calling out. They're using my voice now, speaking through me. Sometimes I'll open my mouth to say something and different words come out, words I didn't choose, didn't think. Names of people I don't know, pleas for help, screams. Yesterday I was at the grocery store and I tried to ask the cashier a question. What came out of my mouth was, "I've been here so long, please, someone find me." The cashier stared at me in horror and I had to leave without buying anything. I've stopped talking almost entirely now. I communicate through notes and texts, like I did during those 3 silent days. It's easier this way, safer. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up to the sound of my own voice coming from the other room. I'll get up and search the house, but I'm always alone. The voice keeps talking anyway, holding conversations with people who aren't there, answering questions no one asked. I think part of me is still in that cave. Or maybe part of the cave is still in me. The echoes never really stopped, they just moved inside, took up residence in my throat, my lungs, my vocal cords. I've thought about going back. Maybe if I returned to that chamber, called out again, I could somehow retrieve what I lost. But I know that's insane. I know that if I go back into that cave, I won't come out at all. Whatever's in there is patient. It's been collecting voices for a long time, adding them to its chorus. It let me leave because it knew I'd carry it with me. Some nights I dream about the cave. In the dreams, I'm walking through that passage again, heading deeper instead of toward the exit. And I can hear myself calling from up ahead, my voice echoing in the darkness, asking me to hurry, telling me everyone's waiting, telling me it's time to come home. I always wake up before I reach the chamber, but the dreams are getting longer. And one night, I know I won't wake up at all. I'll just keep walking, keep following my own voice deeper into the dark, until I become just another echo, just another voice calling out in the stone, waiting for someone else to answer back. I've hiked the same trail every October for the past 20 years. It's a loop in the Great Smoky Mountains, about 8 miles total, that starts at a parking area off Route 441 and winds through old-growth forest before climbing to a ridge with views that stretch for miles. I know every switchback, every landmark, every fallen tree. I've watched saplings grow into mature oaks along that trail. I know it better than I know the streets of my own neighborhood. That's why I noticed the rock slide immediately. It was early October, peak foliage season, and I'd taken the day off work to do my annual hike before the crowds arrived for the weekend. The weather was perfect, cool and clear, with that crisp quality to the air that only comes in autumn. I'd been on the trail for about an hour, moving at a comfortable pace, when I rounded a familiar bend and stopped dead. There was a rock slide across the trail, not a huge one, maybe 20 feet wide, but significant enough that it had torn down several trees and exposed a section of the hillside I'd never seen before. The rock was still pale where it had been buried, not yet weathered by exposure to the elements. This was recent, probably within the last few weeks. I picked my way across the debris carefully, testing each stone before putting my full weight on it. The Forest Service would have crews out to clear this eventually, but for now, it was passable if you were careful. I was almost to the other side when something caught my eye. There was an opening in the hillside, a cave entrance, maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, tucked behind what had been a massive boulder. The rock slide had shifted the boulder, exposing the entrance. I'd hiked past this spot hundreds of times, and I'd never seen any indication there was a cave here. I should have kept walking. I had another 5 miles to cover, and I'd planned to be back at my car by 3, but I've always been curious about caves, and this one looked shallow enough to be safe. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, then crouched down and peered inside. The cave was small, more of a cavity in the rock than a true cave. The floor sloped downward slightly, and I could see the back wall maybe 15 feet in. Nothing special, just bare limestone and some scattered rocks. I was about to back out when my light caught something near the back. There was a backpack sitting on the ground. I stared at it for a long moment, my mind trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Why would there be a backpack in a cave that had been sealed until recently? Had someone else found this entrance and explored it already? But that didn't make sense. The rock slide looked fresh, and the backpack didn't look like it had been sitting in a cave for weeks. It looked clean, new almost. I crawled inside, keeping low to avoid hitting my head on the ceiling. The air was cold and still, with that particular smell that caves have: mineral and earth and ancient water. My phone light bounced off the walls as I moved, creating dancing shadows. When I reached the backpack, I recognized it immediately. It was a North Face model, dark blue with gray accents, with a specific pattern of wear on the shoulder straps and a small tear on the bottom corner that I'd gotten from a sharp rock on a different hike years ago. It was my backpack, the one I was currently wearing. I set down my pack, the one I'd been carrying, and picked up the other one. They were identical. Same model, same color, same wear patterns, same tear on the bottom corner. I unzipped the main compartment with shaking hands. Inside was my wallet, brown leather, worn smooth on the corners, with a small coffee stain on one side from when I'd spilled my morning cup in the car last year. I pulled it out and opened it. My driver's license stared back at me, my photo, my name, my address. All my credit cards were there, arranged in the same order I always kept them. There were even the same random receipts I never bothered to throw away, one from the gas station where I always filled up, dated 3 days ago. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. Brown leather, worn smooth on the corners, with a small coffee stain on one side. I opened it. My driver's license stared back at me. Same photo, same everything. I had two wallets, two identical wallets, both worn in exactly the same way, both containing the same cards and receipts. My hands were shaking as I reached back into the backpack. There was a keychain with my car keys, the same ones I'd used to drive here this morning. I felt in my pocket again. My keys were still there, the metal warm from being close to my body. I pulled out my phone from the backpack. It was my phone, same model, same case, same crack in the screen protector that I'd been meaning to replace for months. I pressed the home button and it lit up, showing my lock screen a photo of my wife and daughter at the beach last summer. I pulled my phone out of my other pocket. Same crack in the screen protector, same lock screen photo. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. It clattered on the stone floor, the light flickering but staying on. I was breathing hard now, my breath coming in short gasps that echoed in the small space. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. I looked around the cave wildly, my light sweeping across the walls. There had to be an explanation. Someone was playing a trick on me. Someone had stolen my things, made copies, and left them here as some kind of elaborate prank. But that didn't make sense either. Who would do that? How would they even know I'd find this cave? And then another thought occurred to me, even more disturbing. When had they stolen my things? My wallet and keys and phone were in my pockets right now, had been all morning. I hadn't been anywhere recently where someone could have taken them and returned them without me noticing. I backed out of the cave so fast I scraped my hands on the rock. I didn't care. I needed to get out of there, needed to be in the open air, in the sunlight, where things made sense. I left the backpack where it was, didn't want to touch it, didn't want to know what else might be inside, and scrambled across the rock slide. My legs felt weak as I hiked back down the trail. I kept reaching into my pockets to check my wallet, my keys, my phone. They were still there, still solid and real, but I couldn't stop thinking about the duplicates I'd left behind. Perfect copies, worn in exactly the same way, containing exactly the same things. I made it back to my car in record time, practically jogging the last mile. The parking area was still empty. I'd had the trail to myself all morning, and my car sat alone under the trees. I fumbled with my keys, dropped them twice before I managed to unlock the door and throw myself inside. I sat there for a long time, my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm my breathing. The rational part of my brain was insisting there had to be a logical explanation, but I couldn't think of one. Nothing about what I'd seen made any kind of sense. When I got home, the first thing I did was dump out my backpack on the kitchen table. Everything was there: my water bottle, my first aid kit, my energy bars, my spare jacket. I went through every pocket, every compartment. Nothing was missing. Nothing was different from how I'd packed it that morning. I checked my wallet again. All my cards were there. I called my bank and asked if there had been any unusual activity on my accounts. Nothing. I checked my phone logs, all normal, just my usual calls and messages. Everything was exactly as it should be. But somewhere in a cave in the mountains, there was another backpack, another wallet, another set of keys, another phone, all identical to mine, all impossible. My wife got home from work around 6. I tried to explain what had happened, but even as the words came out of my mouth, I could hear how crazy they sounded. She listened patiently, her face showing a mix of concern and confusion. When I finished, she suggested maybe I'd gotten confused, maybe seen someone else's backpack, and in the dim light, thought it looked like mine. I showed her my 2 phones. No, wait, I only had 1 phone. The other one was still in the cave. That's when I realized I had to go back. I had to see it again, had to prove to myself it was real. And maybe, if Eware's honest with myself, I had to get that phone. Something about leaving it there felt wrong, dangerous even, like I'd left a piece of myself behind. I called my friend Dave, told him I'd found something weird on the trail and wanted to show him. He was always up for an adventure, and he agreed to meet me at the trailhead the next morning at dawn. We set out early, Dave chattering about work and his kids while I led us up the trail. I was quiet, focused on getting to the right spot. The morning was overcast, threatening rain, and the forest seemed darker than it had the day before. When we reached the rock slide, I stopped and pointed. "There," I said. "Behind that boulder, there's a cave entrance." Dave looked where I was pointing. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What cave entrance?" I stared at the hillside. The boulder was there, massive and gray, exactly where it had been. But there was no opening behind it, no gap, no darkness, no cave. Just solid rock, the surface weathered and covered with lichen, if it had been exposed for decades. "It was right there," I said, my voice rising. "Yesterday, there was a cave right there. I went inside, I found..." I stopped. How could I explain the backpack, the wallet, the impossible duplicates? Dave walked over to the boulder and examined it closely. He ran his hand over the rock surface, looking for any crack or seam. "I don't see anything, man. Are you sure this is the right spot?" "I'm positive. I've hiked this trail for 20 years. This is the exact place." We searched the area for another hour, checking every boulder, every section of exposed rock. There were no cave entrances anywhere along this section of the trail. The hillside was solid, unbroken, as if no rock slide had ever disturbed it. As we hiked back, Dave kept giving me concerned looks. He didn't say it out loud, but I knew what he was thinking. That I'd imagined the whole thing, that I was stressed or tired or having some kind of episode. I didn't try to convince him otherwise. What could I say? When I got home, I went straight to my bedroom and opened my closet. My backpack was hanging on its usual hook, the same North Face model I'd been carrying yesterday. I checked the bottom corner. The tear was there, just as it should be. But then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a second tear on the opposite corner, a fresh one, the fabric still white and unstained where it had ripped. I'd never seen that tear before. I pulled out my phone and checked the photo gallery. The last photo was from yesterday, a picture of the trail I'd taken before I found the cave. But there was another photo after it, one I didn't remember taking. It showed the inside of a cave, the flash illuminating the stone walls in the darkness. And sitting in the center of the frame, clearly visible, was a backpack. My backpack. But in this photo, there was no second backpack, just the one sitting alone in the empty cave. I deleted the photo immediately, my hands shaking. But I can't delete it from my memory, just like I can't explain the new tear in my backpack or where the duplicate wallet and keys and phone went when the cave disappeared. Sometimes I wonder if I'm the duplicate, if the real me is still in that cave, and I'm just a copy that walked out. The wear patterns are all wrong, the new tear, the slightly different arrangement of items in my wallet, the way my voice sounds just slightly off to my own ears. My wife notices it too, though she doesn't say anything. I catch her watching me sometimes, with a look that's not quite recognition, like she's trying to figure out who I am. I haven't been back to that trail. I tell myself it's because I don't have the time or because there are other places I want to hike. But the truth is, I'm afraid. Afraid of what I might find if I go back. Afraid the cave will be there again, with another backpack waiting inside. Afraid of how many of me might be in there, each one thinking it's the original. Last week, I got a notification on my phone. A credit card charge I didn't recognize, from a gas station in the mountains near that trail. When I called my bank, they said the charge was legitimate, made with my physical card. But my card has been in my wallet the whole time. Someone else is using my cards. Someone who looks like me, sounds like me, has all my identification. I don't know what I found in that cave. I don't know what walked out. All I know is that somewhere in those mountains, there's a version of me that never left. And somewhere in the world, there's a version of me that's living my life. And I don't know which one I am.